So the second time I erased this book, I decided to try and tell the story of writing the poem and of my own difficulties during that process, but through the process of finding that story within Waldheim's words. In November last year, I became interested in the fate of a machine which had been launched into creation and disappeared from sight during my boyhood. The thought of it roaming our system, unconcerned about the policies of the regime, was a relief from the strains and suspicions that surrounded us at home. Every morning, I would visit the library to dig out information for my dissertation on the principles of writing, and in the night, overhead, sought refuge in the parallel journey. Aboard, I read, was a deeply etched record of the world that floated away, full of popular tunes and beautiful technological problems. Perhaps an observer far in outer space might study this information in days to come. He would have to weigh carefully in his heart the words of a man who, by some quirk of fate, had become a spokesman for humanity, who could give voice to all the nations and peoples of the world, and, so to speak, the conscience of mankind. This man, legend states, likely knew of the mass execution of groups of people as a capable officer required to collect and analyze data, prepare reports, conduct investigations, and otherwise facilitate operational projects in the last World War. At the time, however, he did not express concern at this action. To a degree, this is understandable. His voice failed. Now, after years have passed, our little record is carrying his words as Secretary General of the United Nations to a government high above. Thus, I built up a dossier about him over a considerable period of time. His story cast a shadow of unreality over everything. The summer heat relentlessly continued. At home, my wife sent for a parcel of china that one day will come. Whether this will happen in the far distant future, I cannot predict. Certainly the china plays no part in the tribulations of the last year. Even if he had intelligence of disquieting matters, I do not wish to judge here the person of Dr. Waldheim. The dead do not cease in the grave. The world is water falling on a stone. True, I began to cross out words from his book on world peace, but I had mixed emotions about this new development in my life. As a child, spelling out world was to secretly open a world in myself, private and Byzantine, with mountains by a pale, fragile sea, the coast stretching southwards in the curtained evening hours. Now, to cross line after line out of his work seemed to me a slow and difficult process that verged on the ridiculous. I labored, often tempted to throw up my hands in frustration on this form. I expunged colonial wars, the Cape Verde Islands, the dilemma of self and a broken government thus. Within a year, the little declarations that remained seemed to me to silence any hope for a united world. I'll just read one short section from my third erasure of this curious book. This time I found a kind of adventure story in Waldheim's text, but kind of a Dante-esque adventure through purgatory. I don't know if this requires any other commentary other than the fact that in this third erasure of Waldheim's book, the speaker is guided by a figure called the minister, because the word minister keeps appearing. There's always foreign ministers and ministers of the interior, et cetera, in Waldheim's book. So a figure named the minister leads the narrator through a kind of underworld. This is from the 8th chapter of Waldheim's memoir. I was led to a globe, beholden to its vast revolution the eyes could not process. A revolution living eyes could hardly credit. My life diminishing in scale. Myself, the moving woods they called the real. Guided by a spirit to low countries in disarray, the patchwork of views emerged in negative. Machinery in the fields. Groundwork. The promise of form in the background. There was a universal man, a scholar of history. To exercise his heart, he would complain about love in front of the famous Chagall window. Autumn, that revision of the year, covering the ground. One swallow moving south. Form working the levers. And I became a disciple of despair, for I had a long good look at that world. The view alarmed me. A heath leading south to a high summit, a summit we decided to approach, but I knew this would be pointless. Help, I said, and immediately fell in the first circle, the center of never. There, the minister, being a sympathetic character, offered me welcome. He had constructed a residence which included a private zoo, where he kept a collection of exotic political leaders, set in the midst of vineyards, the surrounding waters deep. His great concern, the erosion under the world. Greeting me there, with dinner in mind, he launched his primitive harpoon at men in the dark. One gargled and spat. Then he swallowed the skin, red and raw, which he insisted was the best way to eat a respected former congressman. Well, very well. It was an old and somewhat shabby-looking falcon, professing disbelief. Are you Thing or King? I was impressed by the speech. Hard indeed to respond. Facing him, I said, help. He was cooperative, and over that Sahara within, he invited me to cross, beyond the fragile coast, toward the wisest men. Friends, somewhat surprised by grace, I was flown to universal applause, from the west to the east summoned, asking the minister, my speech in disarray, is that legion I see hitherto doomed? And climbing higher, as new countries approached, taken up in the still atmosphere, and weighed down by an increasing mood of if only. Thank you. Wine and Arun for a while.